This podcast may contain content that is graphic and disturbing in nature. Listener discretion is advised.
While studying in
30th,
Italy, this
2009,
vibrant
a black
20-year-old
Nissan Sentra
English
was found
foreign exchange
submerged in the
student was
Rideau
the victim
Canal
of a
in
horrific
Ontario,
crime.
Canada.
What followed
On
was
the
an
outset, it
international
seemed like a
media
tragic
circus
accident,
that led
but
to
a deeper
several
look would
arrests.
reveal a clash
However,
of
the official
cultures
narrative will
centered
put
around
another
a
woman
family's
in the
honor.
forefront,
But to the
creating
community,
new harm
it was an
and
act of betrayal
overshadowing
that
the
would
true
shock
victim
the
in this
entire
case.
country. This is the Shafia family story dedicated to Zainab,
This is the
Sahar,
Meredith Kircher
Guede,
story.
and Rona.
Hi, Meghan.
Amy,
Happy
so
New
good to see you in the
Year.
studio
Happy New
and
Year,
back
and
on
welcome
campus.
to season
I
3
know.
of
We
Women
get
in
to share an
Crime.
office.
I can't
I mean, what
believe
could be
it.
better?
I know.
I know, but
I'm
we usually
thrilled.
don't wind
I
up
love
on the
this
same
show.
days.
I
But
do
this
too.
semester,
Yeah.
we're pretty
We have
much
a lot
sharing
of
a day
other
together.
shows in
It's
the
good that we
works,
don't
but
wind
this
up on the
is my
same days
baby.
because when
This
we're
is our
there,
favorite.
we
Yeah.
don't get
I
much
can't
done.
lie.
We shut
All
our
right,
door
so
and we
before
talk
we
amongst
kick off
ourselves.
season
Meeting in
3,
progress.
we
Do
have a
not
few
disturb.
supporters to
I
thank.
know, it's
Okay, who do
terrible.
we have? I'm so
No,
excited.
seriously,
Well,
we're
we
there
have
for our
Tiffany
students,
W.
but
from New
it's
Jersey
a good thing
who
we're
loves our
not in an
accent,
office
by the
together
way.
all the
I
time.
don't have
It's
an
also
accent.
good
I
we're
don't
not in the office
understand
at the
what
same
people are
time because
talking
you
about.
like
You
the way
do.
I keep
I'm
my
fine,
desk.
but
It
thank you,
drives you
Tiffany.
crazy. We also have
Thank
Hillary.
you, and that's a
Hillary's
good
one of my
reveal.
fave
So
names.
I'm a neat
Oh,
freak. I like
that's nice.
everything
And we
neat.
have
Amy
Heather in
is
Indianapolis
soft.
and Amy
Her
M. from
folders
New
are
Hampshire.
everywhere. Her
We
desk has
also
no
have
order. She
Whitney
has
A.
Post-its
from Lexington,
everywhere pens.
Kentucky.
She even
And
left,
Megan, how
when I came
cool
in
is
the
this?
office
We
the other
have
day, she even left
Usima,
the
who
chair
is an
all the way out
avid
so that I had to push her
listener
chair
from
in just to
Uganda.
get
You're
to my
kidding
desk.
me.
This
I'm
might
so
be our
sorry.
first patron
That would
from
be a cute
Uganda. That
Instagram
is so cool.
picture of
Yes.
our
Wow.
desk. Isn't that
Yes.
awesome?
Yeah.
Mental note. Okay.
Yeah.
Side note.
It always
Okay.
blows my mind.
All right.
the kind
Well,
of
I'm
support
glad that we
get,
both had a
and
nice
we
break.
just
It's
really
spring
have to thank
semester.
you. All the support
And
means
we're
so much
refreshed.
to
We're
us.
ready to go.
It means
And
so
we're
much
also
to the
excited
show, and it's the
to be
reason why we
recording.
can
So today's
keep
case is
bringing
one that
you
was
suggested
great
by
women
both
in crime
patron
episodes.
and
Thanks for
another
listening
listener
around the
who
world.
emailed us. And
All right,
I
this
think
episode
it
is
a
devoted to
very
the
unique
murder
case
of
and a
Meredith
topic
Kircher,
we
as
have
she was the
not
primary
covered
victim
before.
in this case.
I'm really looking
Now,
forward
much
to
of
the
the media
analysis,
attention,
but
however,
we also want to
focused
thank
on one
these
of the
great
people who was
supporters of ours
accused of
before we get
Meredith's
going
murder,
today.
and that, Megan,
So,
is
who do we
Amanda
have to
Knox.
thank?
And I would
All right,
bet
Megan, we
that
have
many
two
people
international
listening right now
supporters
know that
I wanna
name
start
probably
with.
more so than they know Meredith
Angelica
Kircher's
from
name.
Germany.
I think that's a
And
guarantee.
I have to say,
Yeah.
Angelica
we did, in
wrote
fact,
have an
such
opportunity
a
to
lovely
interview
letter
Amanda
on
herself.
Patreon. You should
We
go
will be
check it out if
releasing
you haven't
that
seen it yet,
interview in
Meghan.
a separate
But,
episode.
you know,
That
she
is
was
already
asking if there's any
available on
way to
Patreon
have access to the
ad-free
classes
right
we
now.
teach.
For the rest
And
of our listeners,
if I had $1
the
for every
Amanda
time
Knox
someone asked us
interview
that,
will be released
we're
next
working on
week.
something.
Now, Amanda
listeners,
has been
so
asked
just,
so many of
yeah.
the same
I was
questions
gonna say
before,
that.
over
Well,
and
that's a
over
great
again.
question,
So
and
we
we
wanted
are
to take
working
the
on something to
opportunity we
release to you
had to
guys
speak with
all,
her
so
to address the
stay
aspects that she
tuned.
rarely
Yes,
talks
we also
about.
have Berg
So we
Run
hope that
from
you find this
Iceland.
new
Thank you
approach
so much.
interesting
Wow.
because I can
We
tell you
have
we
Beth
definitely
Boys.
did. All right,
Do you have
Meghan,
anyone
and now
else?
on to
Yes,
our
we are
first
very lucky to
episode of
have
season 3,
Darlene
the
from
Meredith Kircher
Connecticut.
story.
Next
Meredith
door,
Kircher was born on
RJ
December
Garvey,
28th,
Danny,
1985
and Emily.
in southern
And I
London,
think we have
England.
someone else, Amy,
And
right?
Meredith was the
Yes, we have
youngest
a
of
very
4
special
children.
person,
She had
a
a
friend of
sister,
mine,
Stephanie,
who
and 2
I
brothers,
noticed
John
was a
and
supporter,
Lyle.
which
Growing
I
up,
find
Meredith played
so
many
sweet.
sports, and she
Thank
was
you,
considered
Amanda.
a very
That
popular
is so
girl
nice
who
of you.
was
You know, she's been
intelligent,
listening
sweet,
since
and also
day
a
one
little
of
bit on the
Directed
shy
You.
side.
We really,
She had
really
attended
appreciate
private
you.
school,
And funny that
where
you
she
have
did
a friend,
very well.
Amanda,
And
because
after
I also
graduation,
have a
she
friend,
attended
Amanda,
the
from
University
college,
of Leeds
who we
in
used to
West
call
Yorkshire in
Demanda.
England. By the
She's
summer
a
of
listener,
2007,
and I'm so
Meredith was a
grateful, and I
21-year-old
miss her. Can't wait to
third-year
see her.
college student
And
studying
now, onto
European
the
studies
Shafia
with aspirations
family
to work for the
episode.
United Nations.
Today's story begins
With
in
the fall semester
2008 when the
approaching,
Shafia
Meredith
family
traveled to
immigrate to
Perugia,
Canada.
Italy. Now, that's in
Originally
central
from
Italy. It's
Afghanistan,
north of
they left
Rome
the
and
country
south of
when
Florence.
civil
Megan,
war
have you been there?
erupted.
No, but I've been to
There's a lot of
Florence.
players here, so
This
you
is
better
where
pay
she had
attention,
signed
Amy,
up for a
okay?
study
And
abroad
everyone
program
else, because
with an
this took me a
emphasis
little bit
on
to master
European
as well.
politics and Italian
Mohammed
coursework.
Shafia,
She
the
arrived
head
in
of the
Perugia
family,
on September
ran a very
1st,
successful
2007,
import-export
and she moved
business.
into an
His
apartment.
wife,
Actually, they
Tuba,
call it a
ran the
flat.
household,
So she
and
moved
together
into a
the
flat
pair
with
had
3 other
7
women,
children.
Among them were two
We're not gonna
Italian
discuss
women
all of
and
the
one
children.
American.
Prior to
The
Canada,
two
they
Italian
had lived
natives
in
were
Dubai for quite
Filomena
some time,
Romanelli and
and
Laura
Mohammed still
Mazzetti.
made
These two women
frequent
were a
and
little bit
long
older
business
than
trips to
Meredith,
Dubai.
more
And while
established.
he
They
was
were already,
gone, eldest
working. They were
son,
done with
Hamed,
school.
was in charge,
But the fourth
he wasn't the
roommate was
oldest child.
similar
He
to
was the
Meredith,
eldest
and
son.
she was also an
Mohammed's daughter
exchange student.
Zainab was
Her
the
name was
oldest,
Amanda
followed
Knox,
by
and
her
she was
brother
20 years
Hamed,
old.
sisters
Amanda was from
Sahar
Seattle,
and
Washington,
Gidi,
and she was
two younger
studying
girls and a
linguistics.
younger brother.
By
Those
all
two
accounts,
younger girls
Meredith
and the
was really
younger
having
brother
a great
aren't
time in
really
Italy. She had a
integral
lot
to
of
today's
friends.
story,
She was
and
doing
because
great
they're
in school.
minors,
She was
they're
working at a
protected.
local
So we want to
pub
just
and also
maintain their
working as a
anonymity.
tour guide.
Rona, an
However,
adult
less than
female,
2 months
also lived
after
with them,
arriving in
and
Italy,
even though she
tragedy
was
would
thought to
strike.
be a
On
nanny
November
by
2nd,
outsiders, she was
2007, at
actually
approximately
Mohammed's
1:30 in
first
the
wife.
afternoon,
Okay.
one of
You look a
Meredith's
little
roommates,
surprised.
Amanda,
So
came
is this
home to their
polygamy?
shared apartment.
Okay, so
Amanda
yes,
was
it
returning
is.
home
What
after
happened
spending
was
the night
that
at her
Rona
boyfriend's
could not
place.
have children,
And right
I
away,
guess
she saw
she
that
and
the
Mohammed
front
tried
door
for
was
quite some
unlocked
time.
and open.
I believe they also
So she
went for
wasn't too
fertility
alarmed.
treatments.
She thought maybe
but
one of her
in
roommates
the end, she
had,
just could not produce
left
any
the
children.
house
So
quickly,
she
maybe
gave
forgot to shut the door.
basically
You know,
her
sometimes, Meghan, if
approval.
you don't latch the door,
She
the wind could
consented
blow
to
it
Mohammed
open.
taking on
Or
a
maybe
second
even
wife
something
so
as
that they
simple
could
as
bear
someone ran
children,
in for
and
one
so
of her
they
roommates
can
had run in for
continue the
something.
family name.
Not a big deal.
So did the
However,
three of
when
the
Amanda got
adults
to the bathroom,
raise
she
the
also
children
noticed
together?
a small amount
They
of
did.
blood in the bathroom.
And you'll find out how
Now, this is
this
just a few
relationship
drops in the
evolved. But
sink,
essentially,
and she
Rona
really attempted
was
to just
also
rationalize it
partnered
by
with
assuming that
Mohammed
the
in
origin was
choosing
innocuous.
Tuba.
Amanda
So
had
she gave
recently
her
gotten her
approval
ears pierced,
of
I read
Tuba. She
somewhere, so
participated.
maybe she was
But
thinking
this
that
would
was
be a
from
decision
her, or
she would
maybe
later
one
come
of her
to regret
roommates
because
had
while
cut
Rona
themselves
got along
shaving.
quite
I can understand
well
why she didn't think
with
too much
Tuba's
of it.
children,
I
Tuba
mean,
and
this is
Mohammed's
not going to be
children,
totally
she was
described
unless
as
very
I
caring
saw
towards
a
them.
pool of
She did
blood
not
at a crime
share
scene.
the same
A couple
relationship
of drops,
with
a
Tuba.
couple of marks.
In fact, Tuba was
4
quite
girls,
mean to Rona and treated
women,
her like a servant rather
female
than
issues.
family. So
This
Rona
could
was
easily be
the
explained.
motherly,
Then she
caretaking,
also noticed
warm
there was a
one,
mark
and
on the
Tuba was
rug.
like
It was a little
house
larger and
administrator.
more
She was
brown
the
in color.
strict one. From what I
Again,
understand,
she's
she was
noticing
not
these
very
things,
warm
but
and
nothing's
fuzzy.
really alarming her.
The children were
until she
expected
goes
to
into the
abide by
other
the
bathroom
cultural
in the
norms of
apartment, and
traditional
she noticed that there
Islam,
was feces
even though
left
their
in the
family
toilet.
wasn't very
And
religious
this made her feel
practice.
uneasy
But
because
Mohammed
she says
subscribed
that
to
she
these
knew none of
norms,
the women
and this
that she lived with
precluded
would fail to
dating
flush
and
the
many
toilet.
other forms
Now
of
she starts
westernization.
wondering, is someone in the
fact,
house? And she
Mohammed
gets
wanted
an
to
eerie
arrange
feeling. The
marriages for
combination
all
of
of
the
his
open front
daughters,
door,
but the girls
the blood
had
in the
very different
bathroom, the
plans.
unflushed toilet.
Zainab, the
She's
eldest,
starting to feel a
was
little
allowed to
concerned,
attend
perhaps
the
a little
same
scared.
language school
At
as her
this
brother
point, Amanda
Hamed,
left the
so that
apartment to head
Hamed
back to her
could
boyfriend's
essentially
place,
keep
who
watch
lived
over
very
her.
close by.
I'll get to their
And then the
ages
two of them
shortly,
headed back
but
to
at the
the
time
apartment
Zainab was
together
allowed
to
to
see
attend
what
the
was
school.
going on.
I
She
believe
also
she was
had called
17
her
or
roommate
18,
Philomena at
and
this point,
he
and
was about
Philomena
a
was
year
pretty
behind her,
concerned and said,
so
"Can
very
you
close
kind
in
of see
age.
what's going on?"
But because
It seemed that
culturally
Amanda may
he
have
was
been a
the
little more
boy and
flippant
he was
about
the
it.
eldest,
It's probably
he was
how I would
expected
be,
to
and
be
maybe
kind of
you would be
second
a
in
little.
line.
You know,
He
everyone's
watched over the
kind of different
girls
on the
in
urgency
school.
in these
He watched over
situations.
the
Sure.
household.
Amanda's
He
boyfriend was
again,
23-year-old
he was next in line.
Italianated Raffaele
Eventually, a young
Solicito.
man
Now,
named
you hear this
Amar
name pronounced
Wahid
many different
also
ways, and Meghan,
went
as
to the
you know,
same
I do
school
not
as
pronounce
Zainab
things great,
and as
so
Hamed.
please bear
And
with me
Amar
here.
had
What? I've
developed
never
a
heard that
crush
about
on
you, Amy.
Zainab.
Yeah, no
He was
one's
too
ever
shy
said
to talk to
anything
her,
in
though,
any
so
of our
he sent her a
reviews about
Valentine's
that.
Day card and expressed
Amanda and
that he was
Raffaele had met
interested.
less than
He
a
wrote,
week prior
"I'd like
at
to
a
be your
classical
friend.
music
I'd
show,
like to know
but they
you,
had
and if
spent
you think
nearly
this is
every moment
appropriate, and
together.
if you
So,
accept my
Meghan, you remember
friendship,
being
wear
young,
a white
and
dress
even if
tomorrow."
you
Aw,
meet
that's
this new
cute.
guy
It's fair.
and
And
you're
the next
hanging
day,
out,
she was dressed
every
in all
day
white.
feels
Aw.
like a month.
I think that's
right?
really
That's very
sweet.
cute.
So,
We talked
you know,
about
it's
that.
young
I
love.
just
They
think
were
that was
only
really
together
very,
a couple
very
of
sweet.
days,
More
but
notes
as
would
it's
pass,
described,
and
they were
would
very
begin
much
to
in love
talk
and spent
on the
every
phone,
moment together.
but it had to be very much
Raffaele
in
grew up
secret.
in southern
Did
Italy,
he also
and he was living in
follow
Perugia
Islamic
studying
traditions? And
computer
if so,
science
are
at
the
the
boys
nearby
allowed
university.
to like
When the
court
two came
the
back to the
girls?
home,
It's a really
they
good
were
question. He
looking
was
around and they
Pakistani,
noticed
and I
a
think that
broken
his family
window in
also expected
Philomena's room,
him to
which
marry
was
someone
very
or select
clearly a
someone
sign of a break-in.
also who was
Raffaele
Pakistani.
So it was a little bit
called
forbidden
112,
on his end
which
as
is
well.
Italy's
It was very
emergency
forbidden,
number,
and it's interesting that
to
you say that
report what was
because
going
I
on.
watched an
Meanwhile,
episode
Amanda
of
began calling
Forbidden,
her
Dying
roommates.
for Love,
As I mentioned,
because
she'd
it was
already
one that
spoken to
featured it. But yes, it
Philomena.
was forbidden on
She
both
tried to call
ends.
both of
However,
Meredith's cell
I
phones.
think
Now,
that
Meredith had two
the
cell phones.
danger
She used
was more
one
so on Zainab's
for
side because she
international
was a
calls and
female.
one for local calls.
And
you
you'll see how
remember
that
before
relates.
cell phone
But it's a
technology
good question, Amy.
was
So
where it
they,
is today.
they were
That
passing
was
notes. They were
very
talking
normal.
to each other.
The
I
two
don't think
roommates
that
who were the
Amar was
Italian
worried for
women were
himself,
both
but
away
Zainab
because
certainly
it was the
was.
beginning of a
They
holiday
had
weekend.
to
Now,
hide this
November 1st
relationship.
is an
And
official
from what
holiday
I
in Italy called
understand,
All Saints
Hamed
Day.
was
So
always
Amanda
on
had
top of
spoken to
Zainab.
Philomena
like she
a
was
little
under
earlier.
his
So
watch
Philomena
all the
rushed
time.
back to the house with her
So what
boyfriend.
happened
She
was
wasn't too
that
far away,
they would
and she
find
was
small
really
ways to meet
concerned.
up. So they would go to the
Again,
library.
it was her room
and meet
that
up in
had
there, but
appeared to have
they
been
had to talk
broken
quickly.
into.
They
So
had
she
to
was
talk in
worried
secret.
that something may have
She
been
had to
stolen.
hide the phone calls.
She really
and she was
wanted to
terribly
see what was
afraid of
going on.
Mohammed
She actually
and
would search her
Hamed. I
room,
think
and
she was
inadvertently
really
she was kind of
terrified
all
of
over the
Hamed,
crime scene.
as I understand
More
most
on
of the
that
girls
later.
were. And
Nothing
also of
seemed to be
Tuba.
missing.
The three of
It
them
seemed
were
like
almost
things
like
were in a
three
disarray, like
parents,
someone
three
might have been looking
authoritarians,
through
so to
things, but there
speak.
were like
So
computers
she
and
would
other
warn
valuables,
Amar that
laying
he had
in
to act like
plain
a
sight.
complete
And
stranger
you can
when
see
Hamed
pictures
was
of
around,
Philomena's
so
room
that he would
online.
not suspect
Meghan, have you
anything
ever heard
in
of
the
the postal
relationship.
police?
Here, like the U.S.
Unfortunately,
inspectors,
that
postal
would come to
inspectors?
change
So in
because one day in
Italy, they
March
do a bit more.
2008,
They
when
are a unit of
Mohammed,
the
the
state
father, was
police,
away
and
on
they're
a business trip
responsible
and
for
Tuba was
mostly
gone,
investigating crimes that
Zainab
are,
invited
of course,
Amar
surrounding
to their
the
home.
postal
Did
sector, but
Tuba
also
usually
technology
go
and cyber
traveling
crimes.
with
Why were they
Mohammed-
into
She
this
didn't
one?
always
Yeah,
travel
good
with
question,
Mohammed,
right? Why were
but
they
when
called
she
in?
did,
Well,
they left
they
Hamed in
actually
charge.
had
I was gonna ask
recovered
if Rona was
Meredith's
in charge.
2 phones
No.
They left-
discarded
no,
in a
Rona was
negligent
not in
garden
charge.
earlier
Okay.
that day.
Because it
Oh,
was
I see.
male dominated.
So there are
no,
some
Rona was
conflicting
not in
reports
charge.
on this
Hamed was.
because most
And
outlets
this was a
state
day,
that
so
initially
Tuba and
the
Mohammed
police
were
were
both
there
gone,
as a result of
and
the found
Zainab
phones
thought the house
because they
was
looked to see
empty,
who the
and she
owner
didn't
was,
think
and
her
it was traced
brother,
back to that
he was,
address.
I don't know where
in
he
other
was,
words, the
to be
timing was
honest, but she
kind of
didn't
just
think he was going to
coincidental.
return home.
Why is this even
But
worth talking
unfortunately
about?
for
Well,
her,
because
Hamed
Amanda
came
and
home unexpectedly,
Raffaele
and
thought that they were
though
there
she
in
hid
response
Omar,
to his emergency
Hamed
call.
found
So there
him,
may
and
have
the
been a little bit of
consequences were severe.
miscommunication right from the
Hamed
start.
beat her and
Regardless,
forced
the
her to
group
do
starts looking
homeschooling.
around the home.
Beat
Now you have
her?
the postal
Yes.
police,
Not
you
him.
have Philomena and
he
her
didn't
boyfriend.
touch him, but he
There was
beat her.
possibly another
And
friend
he
or
forced her
two,
to do
and then Amanda
homeschooling
and
from there
Raffaele.
on out.
All
She
I'm
was
hearing
essentially
is
imprisoned in her
contamination,
own home. She lost all privileges.
contamination. But
The family
and
believed
because
that
the
they
postal
had
police
the
aren't,
right
you know,
to
they don't
choose
know that
Zainab's
this is a
suitor,
crime
and she
scene.
did
it
not.
looks like
so
it might
all
be a
these
crime scene,
punishments
but
that
no
were meted
one's
out were really
basically-
meant
we
to
haven't
control
revealed what the
Zainab
crime is
and
yet,
her
other than a
sexuality.
possible break-in.
This went
Yeah,
on
so
for
that's
a
why
long
everyone's
time
looking
too,
around
Amy.
for
The
other signs of
isolation
forced
and the
entry.
punishment,
They
I
try to go
think it
into
went on for
Meredith's
close to a
bedroom,
year.
and they notice
Can you
that her
imagine
door
that?
was
Who was
locked.
homeschooling
And
her?
both
The
Amanda and
brother or the
Philomena
parents?
said this was
Well, I
a
don't
bit
know who was
abnormal
actually doing
for
the
Meredith.
schooling. I don't know if she was
But
doing it
also,
herself,
these
if it was
women
a
have only lived
program, if
together,
it was
you know, less
Rona,
than
if it
2
was
months.
Tuba,
So
but
we
she
don't
was
really
forced to do
know
it from the
exactly what
home, and
people's
she wasn't
habits
allowed
are.
to attend the
But
language
either
school
way,
anymore.
they want to know why it's
Around the
locked, and they
same
want to get in
time,
that room to see
Zainab's
if there's
sister,
any other
Sahar,
signs of
who
a
was about
break-in.
16,
So Philomena's boyfriend
essentially
kicked
she
down the
began
door,
to
and this
test
is when
these
chaos
boundaries
erupted.
set by
Amy, why
Mohammed
is it that
and
her
Hamed,
boyfriend is the one
with a
kicking down the door
relationship
and
with a
not
boy
the
from
police?
Honduras.
I knew you would have that question.
And although
and
she
I know
was
once I give
trying
you
to
the
hide
answer,
it like
you're
Zainab
going
was,
to say that
Hamed
makes total
found
sense.
pictures
So the
of the
police would
pair
have, they
on her
claim that they
phone
would have
and
needed a
alerted
warrant
his
to do
parents,
so.
who were
I see.
very
I'm not sure
angry.
that this is true.
So
but
now you
recall
have
that they were the
Zainab
postal
and
police,
Sahar,
so
and the
maybe
parents are
they just
blaming
felt like it wasn't
Zainab,
like
saying that
part
she
of
set the
their
example from
jurisdiction.
Sahar. In
That's
fact, I think it
possible.
was
Maybe they
Zainab
didn't think it was
who
because, you know, you can
introduced
kick
Sahar
down
to
a
her
door in
boyfriend.
like
And Sahar
exigent
is also a
circumstances. Maybe
teenager
they
at
didn't
this
know if it
time?
was.
Yeah,
so
so
maybe
if
it's
Zainab
just,
is,
like,
at this
least
time about
someone who
18,
has a
Sahar's
right to
about
be there.
16.
Or maybe
There's
they
a
didn't
couple
want to have
years
to pay
that
for
separate them.
damages for breaking a door.
Edie
I mean, that
in the
could be the
event.
case too.
younger
Yeah.
sister.
Yeah.
She's about 13
So no
or
one wanted
14
to
at
wait
the
for the
time.
police to get a warrant
As well,
or whatever
begins
else.
showing signs
So,
of,
of course, her
quote,
boyfriend just said, okay, I'll
westernization,
kick down the door.
skipping
So he kicks
school a
down the
lot,
door.
wearing
Everyone
makeup and
immediately
Western
starts screaming in
clothes.
Italian
She was
about
also
the
the
horrific
one
scene.
who stood up to her
Meredith's
father
mostly
the most.
nude body was
And when
lying on the
Child
floor,
Welfare
wrapped
Services
up in a
visited the
duvet
home,
blanket,
because they
covered
did,
in blood, and she
Giti
was
would
very
tell them the
clearly
truth about her
deceased.
father's beatings.
Now,
and
overall,
Hamed's
this crime
beatings.
scene was horrific.
You see, the
There
reason
was
why
blood streaks and
Child
spatter
Services came,
covering
because
the
I knew you were
floor
going to
and
ask
the
that
walls
next,
of
I
the
could
room.
see.
And the
Sahar
police at this
had
point
attempted
made
suicide.
everyone leave the home.
She'd attempted
and they
suicide, and she
quickly
told
called in
school
the
authorities
homicide squad.
about the
But this is
conditions in her
after,
home
as
and
we
how
mentioned, there's
afraid
a
she
lot of
was
people
on
kind
more
of
than one
roaming around, which
occasion
is now very much
from
a
her
crime
father
scene.
and her brother.
It was soon determined that the night before, on November
visited
1st,
the home and
sometime
met with the
between 10
family,
p.m.
they
and
decided not
12:30
to
a.m.,
pursue
Meredith
charges.
Kircher had been sexually
Decision that I'm
assaulted
sure
and
they would
murdered
later come
inside
to
her
regret.
own bedroom.
Now, do you think
while
that
she
has
was
to do
home
with
alone.
trying to respect
Now, we
one's
don't know
culture,
that
not
much
getting involved
about
in family
what went
matters,
on
or
that
what do you
night,
think that's
other
about?
than Meredith
I
had
think
spent
even
some
though
time
Gidi
at a
had
friend's
said
house
that there
nearby.
was,
They
I
actually
read
watched
that
The
Gidi
Notebook,
had
they
reported
ate
the
dinner,
beatings, but that
and
she
then she
later
came home.
kind of recanted
We know
it,
that
and
she
I think
spoke
it's
to her
because they
mom
were so afraid
sometime, I
of
think around
Mohammed.
9 p.m. There
And
was
yeah, I
also
do think there was
CCTV
probably
footage
some,
that showed her
trying
walking
to be
home.
respectful of
I
cultural
am not
differences,
sure
but
why
I also think
reports
that
put the
the
time of
campaign of
death
terror
between
against the
10
girls
and
kept them
12:30
from,
a.m.
kept
But
them
that's
quiet.
what I kept
Good
seeing
question,
in
though.
all the official
Now,
documents.
around April
Well, I mean, I don't know how
2009,
the precise
Zainab
window
ran away
was, but
from
I'm sure
home
they were
and went
using
to a
like, you know,
women's
liver mortis,
shelter
rigor
in
mortis, and
Montreal
other
and
measures to
resumed her
establish
relationship
a
with
window.
Omar.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The family called
Meredith
the
had
police,
sustained 2
but
principal
at
knife
this
wounds
time,
on her
Zainab had
neck
turned
and a
19,
few smaller
so
knife
she could
wounds
refuse to
on
go
her
home. She's an
face
adult.
and neck, and also
And her
a
family,
few
by the way,
wounds on her
was
hands.
so angry
There were
about
also
this. I mean,
several
this was like the
bruises found on
ultimate
her
form of
face,
betrayal.
her
She
neck,
had
her
left
elbow,
them.
her arms,
She
her
was not in
hands,
their
her
control
lower
anymore.
extremities, and at the
So
back
unless
and
her
the
family
top
would
of her
allow
skull.
her to
So
be
we're
with
talking
Amar,
about a big
Zainab was
fight
not going to
here.
go home.
In
And
total, there
shockingly,
were
the
over
family
40
agreed.
wounds between
Because,
the bruises
as I said,
and the
losing
knife
control of their
wounds.
family
The bruises
and
on
having Zainab
Meredith's
run
face,
away was very
particularly around
embarrassing
her
for
mouth
them as
and
well.
nose,
It's not just that
may
it
have been
angered
an
them, it was
indication that the
a form of
perpetrator
disrespect
was
and it was
possibly
embarrassing.
trying to
Why do I
prevent
have a
her from
feeling they were
screaming
lying
by
to
cutting
her?
off her air
Well,
supply or
because
otherwise
you have good
restraining
insights.
her.
We'll
A
see.
post-mortem
As you said, they
exam
might
would
have been
also
lying
reveal
to
that
her.
Meredith
Maybe they
had been
really
sexually
were,
assaulted.
happy to have
As
her
would be
back
expected.
home, or maybe
Let me
there
ask you,
were
Megan, who do you think the
ulterior
police want to
motives.
talk to
On the
most?
surface,
The
though, they
boyfriend.
seem to
Yeah, of course, they're looking
understand that
at
it was a
boyfriends,
choice
they're looking at
between
people close to
losing
her,
her
right?
or losing
So
their
she
honor
did have a
completely.
boyfriend,
And
Giacomo.
those were the two choices for them.
They had started dating
Tuba
very
had brokered
recently,
support
and very
for this
quickly
decision,
they were able to figure
agreeing
out where
to
he was.
allow
So
Amar
no one
and
was really
Zainab to get
looking at him.
married.
So
that was
now
kind
they're
of the
turning
condition,
their
though.
attention
I know
to
it sounds
who's
like,
the next
wow,
person
now
they
all of a sudden they're
probably
letting
That
want to talk to.
escalated.
I'm going to
that was the way to
assume
keep the
Amanda
honor.
because
Not that they
she's
would
the
see
one
each other, that they
who
would be
was
married.
first on
That
the
makes
scene.
sense.
Yep.
It does.
So Amanda came
on some
home to the
level,
crime
okay.
scene,
And
remember,
in May
Amanda lived with
2009,
Meredith,
they
and the
even
two other
attended
women
the
were
wedding,
out of town.
the
So this
family,
is someone who
but
was very
things
close
went
to the victim,
terribly
who
awry
also
at the church.
shares a space with her.
So
Right.
what
They
happened at the
definitely
church
look at
was that
roommates in the inner
Amar's
circle.
family
And we
didn't
would
show
expect
up
this. However,
because they also did
really
not support the
focused in
marriage.
on Amanda
Because they
very
were
early
Pakistani,
on.
right? And
Now, this
wanted
was
him
largely
to
based
marry.
on her
Okay.
stoic
That's correct.
affect
But
after the body was
because
found.
Amar's family didn't show up,
Now,
the Shafia
investigators
took this
found
as a
it curious
personal
that she
insult
was
and
the
an
only one
attack
who
on their
wasn't
honor
hysterical
again.
at the scene.
And again, brought
So
by
let's talk about this for a
Zainab
minute. Why
and
wasn't
Amar's
she hysterical
relationship.
at the scene? Well,
Zainab
first of
was
all, it
crushed
doesn't
and
matter.
called off
No,
the
it
public
doesn't.
wedding,
I mean,
even
we
though
talk about this all
Amar
the time.
still wanted
People
to
have
marry
different
her.
reactions.
The damage
People
was done,
process
though. She really was
information,
upset. Her
grief,
family was
trauma.
upset.
Very
The Shafia
differently.
family
I
had
mean,
been
she could have
publicly
very easily been
humiliated.
in shock.
They
and
had
simply, as you
married
said, we
earlier
cannot
in
judge
a
people's
cultural
affects in
ceremony,
traumatic situations.
but it wasn't
End of
made
story.
public,
End of
and the
story.
marriage was
I think
annulled in
it's
less than
also important
24
to
hours
note,
after
though.
the wedding.
Remember, Italian is
Zainab
not
broke
her
off the
first
relationship
language,
and
and
went back
everyone's
home
screaming
to live
in
with
Italian.
her family.
Amanda and
even though
Raffaele did
Amar
not
was
see the gruesome
brokenhearted
crime
and Zainab
scene.
was
Right.
They
also,
just heard
things were
people
better,
yelling, and then
seemingly,
they
in
were
the
ushered
Shafia
out
home.
of the home.
In
And a lot
June
of reports say
2009,
they
Mohammed
actually had
even
no clue what
suggested
was
that they
going on.
take
They didn't
a
know
family
that there was
trip
a dead
to
body in
Niagara
that room.
Falls.
Right, because they weren't in the
Everyone
room. I
was
remember
so
they were in the living
excited.
room.
Correct.
But that's because they
So
had
the media,
no
I'm
idea
sure you
what was to
recall
take
this,
place
the
on this
media
trip.
captured a video
The family
of
took
Amanda
two
and
vehicles
Raffaele
because they had a big
comforting each
family.
other
So
on
they
the
took
driveway.
a black
Oh, I remember
Nissan
this
Sentra
one.
You
and
know,
a
they were
silver
cuddling and
Lexus.
kissing a little bit,
Hamed drove
and
the
many
three
judged
older
it as
girls. So
odd
he drove
behavior for
with
someone whose
Zainab,
friend has
Sahar,
just
and
been
Giti.
murdered.
And then the
And
other
I
car was
don't know
Mohammed,
that this is
Tuga,
for
and their
sure,
other
but I
small
think
children.
it's too interesting
They
to
went to
not
Niagara
talk
Falls
about.
and
I
reportedly
read
had a
that
fun trip,
some of the
taking
media
and sending
actually played it on
pictures,
a
and
loop
everything went
to make it
smoothly
appear that the
until
two were
they got
kissing and
ready to
cuddling
make
for a
the
long
long
period
drive
of time,
home.
although it was maybe
After
just
several
one or
hours
two
of driving, the
embraces.
family
remember that
decided
as well.
to
I
stop
think you're
at a
right.
motel
Wow.
in Kingston
Talk about the
Mills
media
area
skewing
along the Rideau
perceptions,
Canal
too,
for
and
the
the
night.
reality,
They got their rooms,
distorting
and Zainab
reality.
reportedly
Oh,
knocked
this
on her
is just the
parents'
beginning
door
of what
at
the
the
media did
hotel,
in this
and this
case.
was the
Right.
evening of
So
June
already
29th,
they're kind of looking
2009,
at this
asking for
American
the
woman
keys
who
to the
seems
car
to be,
late that
you know,
evening
cold
because she reportedly
and
needed something
just
out of
not
her bag.
concerned
Just
that
remind
her
me, which
roommate
daughter
had
is
just
that?
been murdered.
Okay,
when, in
Zainab was
fact,
the
she did not
oldest,
even
the one
know
with
at this
whom the
point her
relationship
roommate
with
was
Amar had
murdered.
just
And they
fallen
called
apart.
her
Yes.
often. They
According to
they
her
kept referring to
parents,
them as
that
friends.
was
They
the
weren't
last
really
time
friends, and they
anyone
weren't
saw
enemies, but they
Zainab.
weren't really
The
friends.
next morning,
They didn't know
They
each
were
other that
neighbors.
well.
Mohammed and
It wasn't
Hamed
like
went to the
if I
police
lost
station
you,
to
or you know what I
report
mean. I think
Zainab,
it's just
Sahar,
to put it
Giti,
in that
and
also
Rona
context.
missing,
Correct.
along with
The
their
media,
black
I
Nissan
think, also
Sentra.
misportrayed
But
their relationship.
at this point, the
Another
police had already
reason that
found
investigators
the car.
were looking
They had
so
been called to
closely at
investigate
Amanda
a
is early
vehicle
on, the
submerged
prosecutor
in
had
the
walked through the
canal,
crime
and they
scene and
noticed that there were
declared
bodies
that
inside
a
the
woman
vehicle.
must have been
In
involved
fact,
since
they
the
found
body
all
was
4
covered.
women's
Now, there's
bodies,
two
and it
things
was
to unpack
indeed
here.
the
Number
Shafia
one,
women,
why is the
and the police
prosecutor
began an
walking through the
official
scene, you ask?
investigation.
Yeah.
Because that was my
Police,
first
after,
question.
making
Well,
this
at first
finding, and
I was
after having the
questioning that
family
too,
come
and
down,
I did
they
some
were
research
perplexed by
on
this
Italy's criminal
situation.
justice
There were
system is
so
quite
many
different from
questions
ours,
here.
and that will come
How
up a
did these
lot in this
women get
episode.
there?
But one of
All
the
4 of
main
them.
differences
Was this
is
an
that their
accident?
prosecutors
Because you
often
have,
direct the
it looks
investigation.
like a
They're
car has gone
effectively in
off,
charge of the
the road into the
investigation and
canal.
somewhat are
Or
overseeing
was
the
this
police.
something more
So this
sinister?
was not
They
necessarily
needed to
strange.
interview the family
However, I
immediately.
think it's
First,
strange that he
call
so
interview the
quickly
family members
declared
because
that
they
a
wanted to
woman
put
must
together
have been
a
involved
timeline
because the
and see
body
if they
was
could
covered.
figure
Why
out
do
a
you think he
reason
even
why
said
all
this?
4
I
women
think it's
might have taken the car
gender
late at night.
stereotype that a woman
They
would be more
interviewed Hamed.
caring or
For people who are
considerate, and
interested,
that's
you
why
can
she
watch
would,
Hamed's
after
interview. There's
horrible
clips of it on
murder,
YouTube.
still
It's
take the
also
caution
on,
to cover
I
up
think
the
they
body.
play
I think that's
clips,
one of
if I'm
those,
not
like,
mistaken, on the
it's
show
a
that I
false
watched, Forbidden
assumption,
Dying for
and
Love.
all it'll produce
What
is
Hamed
false
said
leads.
was that
Speaking of
Zainab
false
didn't have a
assumptions, the
license,
prosecutor
but
also
always
said,
begged to
Meredith
drive.
was a
So
strong
it was
girl, and she would have
possible
been
that
able to hold her
decided to
own.
take a
So there must
joyride
have
or
been
to
more
leave
than one
early
attacker.
and
So
convince
very
the others
early
to
on,
join because they all
it
wanted
is
to get
made
home to their
known that
boyfriends and their
there's more than
friends.
one attacker.
I mean,
and
a little
woman
stray
What
was
about
involved.
Rona? She's an adult.
Now, this
How do
is
they explain her
ridiculous.
being there?
Yeah, I think
and
these
maybe
conclusions
Rona,
are,
being the
not really
caretaker
based on
motherly type,
anything,
maybe they convinced her to go along, or maybe she didn't want them to go along because she was, the caretaker,
And
I
the
do not
caring type.
believe that the
This
prosecutor
is
even
strange,
knew
but
the victim.
detectives
So
were
who is he to
considering the
say
possibility
that
of an
she was a
accident.
strong woman?
Though,
and
again,
anyway,
the fact
we know
that Rona
people
was
who
with
are
them,
extremely strong.
if it was the
black
three
belts in
girls,
karate,
they
and
would have.
still
This
can
would
be
have been.
victims. It doesn't
Yeah, this is a
matter how strong
possibility.
you
But
are.
the adults,
Plus, I think the
Rona was
majority
52
of
years old at
victims,
the time.
of female victims,
This was definitely a red flag for them.
are usually
Also, they had the car,
at the hand
and
of
the police
a single
noticed a
perpetrator.
few things
Suspicious
that
on Amanda,
were
the
odd
media
if this
starts
was an
combing through
accident.
her social
First, the
media
ignition
pages
was
and taking
off.
everything out
And
of
it shouldn't be.
context.
If they
Now,
drove off
at
a
this
road into the
point,
water,
we're
the
talking
ignition would still be
2007.
on.
They were
were looking at her MySpace.
Definitely
You
a red
remember
flag.
MySpace?
Red flag
I
one.
do.
Next,
So they're
the
looking
driver's
at every
window
picture
was
and
down,
scrutinizing.
and
I'm
the
not
water
even
wasn't
going to
that
get
deep at all.
into the
I mean,
pictures
the
because
car,
it's,
you could
it's
see the car.
ridiculous. There's no
So the
reason
water,
to
we're
waste our
talking about
time
a couple
talking
feet.
about it.
So if
Well,
the driver's
what came
window's
out of this
down,
was the
and it's only a
nickname
couple feet,
Foxy
at least
Noxy.
someone could have
remember
maybe
that.
swam
Yeah,
out.
so Foxy Noxy
Okay?
is,
The
I think
autopsies
most people who
showed
have
that
heard
the
of
women
this
had
case
drowned,
have
but they
heard
all
of
had
Foxy Noxy.
contusions
Do you know
to
where
the
that even
tops of their
originated from?
heads
Yeah, high school
that happened
thing or
before
no?
death.
Yeah, it's
So
actually
it
middle
seems
school.
that
I read that
this might
she
not
was
be an
a
accident
really
at all.
strong
And now
soccer
detectives
player.
were trying to
And
figure
the
out
nickname
who'd want
was
to kill
given
these
to her
women.
by her middle
It
school
looked like they
soccer
were funked
teammates
on the
because
head,
she was
basically.
quick on the
So
field.
they all had
quick like a
similar
fox.
head
Get it?
injuries
Foxy
that
Noxy.
were not
Totally taken
indicative
out of
of like a
context.
car crash
Yep,
type
because
injury.
the tabloids
Correct.
were quick to
That's
assume
exactly
this
right.
nickname
Well
must have
summed up,
reflected
Amy.
her obsession with sex.
In interviews with the
Because
family,
in
they
Italian, it
insinuated
translates
that
to cunning
Amar,
/ evil fox.
remember Zainab's ex,
So
the
they're building this
ex-husband
persona,
or,
this character
that he was
of
very
Amanda
angry with
as a
Zainab, feeling
seductress.
quite betrayed.
And as you would
and that
expect,
he was so
the
angry
public
that they should look at
immediately
him as a
became
suspect.
enthralled
So the police
with this
investigated
persona
Amar,
of this
keeping
beautiful
this motive in
American
mind, but it was
seductive
still
killer.
hard to
In the past, we've
understand
talked about
how
confirmation bias, and
why
I
he
think
would
it's
have
safe
killed
to say
all these
that
other women.
this
How
case
far were
really
they from
does
home at this
illustrate
How far is
confirmation
Niagara
bias at
Falls
its
from where they
finest.
were in
Now,
Canada?
every
They were
single thing
several hours away
that
from
this
home.
woman
It would have meant
did
Amar would have had to
was
go
seen
find
as
where
a
they
way
were,
to
and it just
confirm
doesn't
this
seem
moniker that was given
Plausible,
to her
right?
by the media.
There was no cell
So
phone
anytime she was
messages. If
affectionate with
maybe
her
Zainab
boyfriend,
had told them, "Look,
which
we're
was a
staying
way
here,"
for her to
but there
get
was no
support. She was in
communication.
Italy without
It
any
just didn't make
family or
sense.
friends,
And I think
really.
the
So of
police,
course she was
honestly, were
turning to
pretty
Raffaele.
quickly able to
I'm
rule
sure
Amar
you
out.
recall
During
when
the
the media took
investigation, the
pictures of
Shafia
her
family,
buying
meanwhile,
underwear.
they allowed press
And they
into their
were quick
homes, and they
to
shared
say that her
photos.
buying
They cried
underwear
on the
just showed
news.
how
They
sex
appeared to be
crazed she
so
was.
completely
When in
distraught. I
fact,
totally
this
encourage people
poor
to look at
girl
this
could
because
not get into her
you would be
apartment
pretty
to get
convinced that
clean
they were
clothes.
very,
And
very
that's why she was
upset
buying
and
underwear.
distraught over
I
this,
even feel like
over
we're
the
spending
deaths
too much
of
time
their
on this
family
because
members.
this doesn't deserve
The police
time
were
because it was
becoming
so
suspicious,
ridiculous.
though, of
The media
Hamed,
also got
because
word
Hamed
on
said
some
that
what
he
they
had gone
considered
back
strange
to
behaviors.
Montreal in
At
the
one
Lexus,
point,
in the
Amanda
second
was seen
car,
doing yoga
in the middle of
stretches
the night
while she
on
was
that
in the police
evening when the girls
station.
disappeared.
And another point, she was
Because he
sitting on
had to get his
Raffaele's lap,
laptop, and it
giggling.
was important for
Some
work
people said
purposes.
she made
But it
a
was
crude
several hours
comment
away,
when some
right?
of
Yes.
Meredith's friends were
And
saying,
when the
you know,
police
I hope
asked
she didn't
him
suffer.
why he
And
returned
Amanda
in,
shouted
he came
out, well,
back,
of course she fucking
why he
suffered.
returned in a minivan
And again,
and
I
not
don't
the Lexus.
think this shows
I mean, he took the
anything
Lexus,
other
and then he
than
comes back in a
someone's
minivan.
personality.
He didn't have
right?
a very good
None
answer.
of this
saying
information
something like the
is
gas or
indicative
mileage
of
was better
involvement or
on the
guilt in any
minivan
way.
than the Lexus.
Zero, right?
Doesn't make sense.
Oh, this
But
is like
because
police
of
are
the
like,
way that
this
Amanda
is
was
way
being
off.
portrayed,
This doesn't make
a
sense. This guy
ludicrous
says
theory
he's
emerged
leaving,
that Meredith
coming
was
back.
killed
Where's this
during
car?
a
Why is
sex
this car
game
disappeared?
gone wrong.
This like
That
alarms
included
are going
both
off there, or
Amanda
bells
and
are going off.
Raffaele.
Then a finding
remember.
that
It seemed that
confirmed
Amanda had the
police
world
suspicions.
against her.
They found
Rather than
like
becoming
parts or
empathetic
pieces of
toward
the
this
front
young
of the
woman's
Lexus
plight,
at
the
the
overall
crime
public
scene.
attitude
So why
was
would there be
against
pieces
Amanda,
of the
and it was
Lexus? And why were
purely
they
based
hiding the
on
Lexus? Because that's
dramatized
how it also
nonsense.
seemed.
And so while all
Tuba's
these stories
brother
were
also
running, and
contacted
within
the
just a few
police
days of the
to
murder,
let them
law
know that
enforcement were
Mohammed
conducting
had
harsh
mentioned
interrogations
drowning
of both
Zainab
Amanda
as a
and
way to
Raffaele,
manage
of course,
his
separately.
problems with her.
And neither one of
So now
these
police
young
realized
suspects
this
had
might be a
an
family
attorney
conspiracy.
with them.
Turns
Besides the
out
fact
that
that this
even
is
if
troubling
Zainab got
just for
married,
the fact that
Mohammed was still
Italian
discussing
law,
killing her
similar
after she got
to
married,
U.S. law,
even on our honeymoon,
says that
drowning her.
you have the right to have an
Yeah.
attorney present
So
during
police were like,
interrogations.
okay, so now they
and
suspected
also
Hamed,
the
but now
effectiveness
they're like,
of the police
Mohammed
interpreter
and
would
Hamed?
also
Okay.
come into question.
Then
I
they
was gonna say,
discover,
the
police
language
discovered
barrier
that
alone
Rona
would've
is Mohammed's
terrified
wife,
me.
even
So at
though
this
he
point,
had
it's
lied
very
about his
clear
relationship
that
with
they're
her.
just
So
not
now
gathering
Tuba has a
information
motive.
for their investigation.
Well,
as Amanda
now
initially
they're
thought.
like,
So
why is
Amanda
he
thought, yeah, she's a
concealing
roommate.
this
I'm going to help as
completely?
much as I
because
can. Tell them
they
anything I
just
can
said
that would
Rona
help
was like
them.
the babysitter.
But now
He
it
lied. He
starts
lied
to
to the
become
police about the
clear that
relationship.
she is the
Saying-
prime suspect
I
in
don't
this
know.
case.
He had told
On
someone that
November
Rona was a
6th,
babysitter,
during
but
the
he also
course
told
of a
someone that
two-day
she was a
interrogation,
cousin.
Amanda
like
eventually crumbled to
I mean,
the
he told a
pressure.
couple different lies,
She
and the police
provided
found
a
out that he was
confession
wrong.
implicating
And as it turns out,
her
Rona
boss,
desperately
Patrick
wanted out of the
Lumumba,
marriage,
as well as
having
placing
been
herself
abused
and by
regularly
extension
Tuba,
Raphael
Mohammed,
at the
and
scene
Hamed.
of the murder.
But Mohammed would
Her
not allow a
confession was
divorce.
written by the
It
police,
was,
and
again,
she
shameful.
signed
You
it.
won't divorce
It was
me, you
written
won't
in
leave me.
Italian.
So was he
though.
also
And
married
again,
to
that's
Tuba?
not her primary
He was
language.
legally married
She was
to
well
both
versed in
women?
Italian.
Yes,
She was
and we're going to
studying
talk
Italian,
about how this was
but
a
She wasn't
problem
fluent,
and why
is what
he
you're
was
saying.
concealing it.
yeah, she was
in a
not
little
fluent
bit.
in Italian.
The police are
She's in a
getting
foreign
some
country.
real
She's less than
bombshells
proficient
here,
in the
and
native
there's a
language.
picture
She's
that's
hungry.
beginning
She's
to come
tired.
together.
She's
Both
being yelled
Mohammed
at.
and Hamed
And
have
so
become
this
prime
confession
suspects.
emerges, and it
But
was the
they would
result
still
of
have
really
to
an
prove
intense
who did what.
interrogation.
They
Amanda
still
says
have, like,
that
a lot of
during the
missing
interrogation, they
parts.
just kept
They have
screaming at
multiple
her to
suspects,
remember,
which does
remember.
complicate
And
things.
at certain
So they
points,
did
they would
something very
also slap
smart.
her on the
The
head.
police.
So
They
almost
tricked the family
immediately
into
after
believing
providing
they
an
were
account of what she said
just
was really just
awaiting
patchwork,
surveillance tapes from the crime
incoherent
scene.
memories, some
So
of
they
them
offered to
false
take the
memories.
family
She ends
back
up
to the crime
recanting
scene,
very
but
soon
as a
after.
way to
But
see
at
to
this
pay
point, the
respect
police
to
don't
the
want to
final
hear that
resting
because
place.
they got what they wanted.
And then when the family was there. The
based
police were
on
talking in the
her,
background.
quote, written
They pointed out a
confession,
camera.
Amanda, along
said,
with
"Oh yeah, they
Raffaele
placed that camera."
and Patrick
So they placed the
Lumumba
camera
were
there and said,
arrested.
"Oh yeah, we're just waiting for
Patrick
tapes
Lumumba,
to come back from
who
that
is he
camera."
and how did he get
They're all
dragged
panicking.
into this?
They were doing this
Well,
in a way
Lumumba
that
was
wasn't
Amanda's
accusatory because they didn't want to
37-year-old
scare. They
boss
wanted to
at the
scare them,
bar
but they
that
didn't want
she
to
was
scare them
currently
away by
working at.
accusing them and
And the
pointing
two
a
had only
finger.
known
They
each
just
other a
wanted
short
to
time,
kind of
and
lay
they,
a trap.
had a pleasant working
Meanwhile, the
relationship.
police placed
He
a
was brought into
wiretap
this
in the
because
Shafia
the
family
evening of the
vehicle
murder,
to hear what
he
they would
and
say
Amanda were
after the
texting
meeting.
with each other.
And it was
Amanda was
real
spending the night
shocker.
at Raffaele's home
Mohammed
and was
turns
potentially
to
going to
Tuba
work
and
that
says,
evening.
"Remember
She
that there
received
was
a
no
text from her
electricity
boss,
there that
Patrick
night, right?"
Lumumba, who said,
Okay,
don't worry
police,
about
this is
coming in
another
tonight.
bombshell
It's a
because
slow
they just
night, to
realized
which she
Tuba's
wrote back,
also
have a good night,
involved.
see you later.
So
The
now we've got
police saw
Hamed
this and
Mohammed
said,
and
oh,
Tuba.
this is the other
But
person who
Tuba
was
said
involved,
that
because
she
she
thought it
said,
was a
see you
police
later.
bluff.
See you
And the
later. I was
family
just gonna
all
say that
agreed,
see you
just so you
later,
know,
which
that it
is
was a
a
good thing
common
that they
term,
had
was gonna be the
regained
thing they
their
would latch
honor.
onto.
Yes, and remember,
Mohammed
we're
called the
talking about a
girls
different
worthless
culture.
and of
Our
no
see
value
you
to
later
him and his
in the
family,
U.S.
and they
is a
all
bit
agreed.
different than
They were
see
all
you later
happy
in
about the
Italy,
girls
which
being
I think
gone.
was taken
That's still
a
not
bit more
the evidence
literal
they need.
as
Okay.
I will see
Well,
you later.
it was
Okay.
when
Whereas
the
in the
evidence
US,
they
we
needed.
just
You
say,
remember
see you
there was
later,
no
have a good night.
electricity
Yeah.
there that night.
After
Yeah,
the confession,
certainly
the
is.
police
That's enough.
didn't
But
even
him
tell
saying
Amanda
just
that she was
that
being
the
arrested.
girls were of
They
no
told
value
her
to
they were
him.
taking
No,
her
that's
to a
not
safe
evidence
house.
of a crime,
In
and
fact,
that
they
might
took her
be
straight
something
to
Mohammed
jail.
would point to later.
She had no idea
But anyway,
what was going
they
on.
did
She
have
didn't
this
even know she was being
acknowledgement that
accused of
they were
murder.
at the crime
She
scene.
didn't
They
see
all
a
acknowledged
lawyer
it, the three
at
of
this
them.
point even.
So the police got
The
search
first time
warrants for
Amanda
their
actually
home,
sees a lawyer,
and they
Meghan,
found out
was
that
when
they
she
had
was
been planning
informed
and
of the
researching
charges
the murders
against
for
her,
quite some
and she was
time.
asked
They
to plead
looked
on
up
the spot.
lots of
So
different
could you
vacation
imagine
areas
having
near
no
lakes.
time to
They looked
process
up
what's
drowning.
going on
They
and
looked
not
up
even know
murder.
that you are arrested
So,
until arraignment?
this was
No,
also
I can't imagine the
crucial
total
evidence for the
fear,
investigation.
shock, everything.
Do people
And,
not
you know,
know?
at the
I mean,
same
this
time,
wasn't that
Patrick
long ago,
was
a decade,
seized in
less-
front of
more
his
than a decade
family,
ago.
and
Do
he was
people
thrown in
not
jail
know
too,
that
and
the
he
police
had
can
no
see
idea
your
what was
Google
going on.
history?
And Raphael
I always
also,
wonder
right?
that.
And
I don't
Raffaele,
understand
he
the cell
was already
phones
in
and the
custody.
Google
He was
history.
just further
I think that
detained
they
at
were
this
so
point.
arrogant that they
When we
didn't
talk
think the
about
police would ever
Patrick,
come in.
now
That's
this
what
is
I
going to
really
be a
think, to be
spoiler
honest.
alert, but he had
I
nothing
think other
to do
people,
with
some
this.
people just
This was
don't
the fault
think
of the
about it. They don't know,
investigators
or they think
because
you can
other
delete
than
your web browser
coercing the
history.
confession from
You can't delete
Amanda,
anything.
they didn't
But
corroborate
now at this
anything
point, the
from
police
her
have
story
everything
or
they
do
need,
any
and
further
they're ready to make
investigation.
arrests.
Luckily, he
So
was released
they arrest
because there were
Mohammed,
several
Ahmed,
alibi
and
witnesses
Tuba,
who
and
came
all three
forward.
are
He
charged
never
with
left his
first-degree
bar
murder.
that evening, and
At
there was
trial,
no one
because this would go to
who said
trial,
he was
the
anywhere
story
but
of this
at that
family
bar.
came out in
Silly.
full.
They
The
should-
honor
they could have
code that they
easily
thought
just
the
confirmed
girls
that
had
before,
violated
like,
had
That's what I'm
motivated
saying.
their
arrest.
murders.
Yeah.
That's what
All
I'm saying.
three,
It was
Mohammed,
such
Tuba,
sloppy
and
police
Hamed
work.
were
They didn't do
involved.
anything.
Though
Also,
it's
there was
unclear
zero
as to
evidence of him
whether
at the crime
they
scene, and they
rendered
tried
all four
hard to
women
put him at the crime scene, but
unconscious.
he had never
Remember, they
set
have
foot
those
into that home.
contusions to the
Right.
head.
Now, Amanda
The
and
pathologist
Raffaele
just couldn't
weren't
say
so
for
lucky.
sure.
In
They
fact,
speculated.
more,
The
quote,
prosecution
evidence, it has to be
speculated
in
that the
quote, 'cause
reason
I don't
they
even consider this
drowned and
evidence,
they didn't
was
escape was
emerging
because
that
they
was
were
working
knocked
against the two.
unconscious.
The
Right.
investigators
And
were
that's what
searching
they
for a
proved.
murder
Pushed him
weapon
into
because
the
we know
well.
how important a murder
But
weapon
the
is to an
pathologist couldn't say for
investigation.
sure. What is
And they
very
could
clear
not
is
find
that
one
all
anywhere at
three,
the
meaning
scene, so they
Mohammed,
decided to head to
Tuba, and
Raffaele's
Hamed,
apartment to
got
look for
into the
one.
Lexus
And
together
of course,
and
they
used
found
it
what they
to
were
push
looking
the
for
Nissan
because
Sentra
they
over the edge
discovered a
into the
knife
canal,
in a kitchen
which
drawer
explains
that
why the
seemed to be
pieces of the
consistent
Lexus were
with
found there.
Meredith's wounds.
I think
The
that the
police
car got
claimed
stuck
that
on
this
the
was
lip,
the knife that
like
was
the
the murder
overhang.
weapon. This
And
was on the
I don't think the
basis
Lexus
of no
was originally
scientific
intended to
testing at
push the
this
car.
point.
I think that was
It was
just a
the only
consequence.
thing that they
and that
could
was something
find
that was
that
very
looked
damning.
consistent
Who was driving
with
the Sentra,
Meredith's
though?
wounds
Either
again.
I forget
In
one of the
addition
other,
to this,
Rona
the
or
media
Zainab was in. I think it
continuing
might have
to
been Rona,
vilify
but
Amanda.
so
In a
the idea was
particularly
that
low
no one would ever
period,
know they
the
knocked him
number
unconscious.
of
They would
men
just
that
be
Amanda
found,
had
and it would
slept
look like an
with, which was
accident. They
taken
had
from her
accidentally
private
gone
diary
off
entries,
into the
which was
canal.
So you
published
think maybe
across
Tuba was
different
driving
media
the
outlets
Sentra
for the
and then
world to
placed placed one of the bodies in the driver's
As if that's
seat
not bad
I'm
enough.
saying
Do you know
someone
how they
had to
got this
drive
list?
Yeah.
the
This
Sentra
list
to
was
the
produced
Oh,
after
okay.
law
I'm sorry. I was
enforcement falsely
misunderstanding.
You know,
Yeah, of
informed Amanda
course.
that
Yeah,
she had
someone,
So you
one of
think
the
that
three
for
drove.
HIV.
Yeah, one of
because
the-
I'm saying it doesn't
remember
make sense
this,
that they
yes.
would
Oh my
that there's any
God.
situation where
They
they would have been
used
able
this
to
as a
talk
tactic
the women into
to
getting
get
into the car for
exactly
any
what
reason.
they
No, they
wanted,
absolutely
which was a
believed
list
that they
of
were knocked
men that she
unconscious,
had
placed
slept
in the
with
car,
so
and
that
then
they
and
could
it wasn't
further
far from
build
their
their
motel
story
too.
about
So
who
had to
they
be some really
believed her
hard
to be.
hits. That's I'm surprised
About
the
as
pathologist.
unethical as I
I'm not
think it
entirely
gets.
surprised.
As if that isn't
you
bad
can't
enough,
always tell what
Meredith's
the
name
I'm
was
conclusions
assuming
are.
barely
they did
mentioned in the
toxicology.
headlines.
I'm wondering
Everything
if
was
the girls
about
were
Amanda
sedated
when
in some
Meredith
way.
was
But
the
they were
victim
not.
in this
They were
No,
not.
yeah,
I
their
remember that too.
scans were
And
clean, so
what
they were
about
not sedated.
Raffaele? No
Which
one
is
really
again
heard
lends
about
more
him.
credence to the fact all
Many
four of them
people, in
obviously
fact,
didn't get
believe
into that
that
Sentra
Raffaele
willingly.
was just at the
They were
wrong
clearly
place
hit
at the
with
wrong
something,
time,
rendered
and he
unconscious
was
in
a
some way that
victim
was
There was
not
no
of
blood
Amanda.
splatter
He
or
was
anything
under
like
her
that?
quote
No.
seductive
No.
spell.
Because they were probably hit
somewhere
else.
else.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
That's how far they were
Okay,
taking this
so
narrative.
all
And now a
four
third
women
suspect
died of drowning.
emerged,
That's
a local
absolutely
man
clear.
by the name of
So why
Rudy
Rona?
Guede.
We've
This is
heard about the
another name you'll
girls.
hear
You know, the
pronounced
girls,
in a few
all three of them, are
different
becoming
ways. Now, Rudy
westernized and
Guede was a
defiant,
20-year-old
according,
man who
quote
was
unquote,
friends with the
according to
men
their
who lived
families.
in the
But what about
flat
Rona?
below Meredith and the
Speculation
other
about
women.
Rona is
Now,
that
how
she
did
was
he get
no
thrown
longer
into this.
very useful.
After
to
all,
the
he wasn't
family.
mentioned
But as
in any of
first
the
wife, she would have
interrogations.
inherited
Amanda
the money
nor
if
Raffaele
anything
ever
happened to
mentioned him,
Mohammed.
and neither did anyone
so her
else.
death would
Well,
eliminate
he
both
became a
problems.
suspect after a
Problems with
bloody
her inheritance and
fingerprint was
problems with the
discovered
girls.
at the crime scene,
A
and it
second
was
reason was that
identified
she was
as
having
belonging
problems
to
with
Guede.
immigration,
Which
and
means
finalizing
finalizing
her status.
You would think, right?
You see,
So at
polygamy
first I
is not
thought that
allowed
as
in
well,
Canada.
but it
It's
turns
illegal.
out they
So
had his
they
fingerprints
had to
on
defraud
file
the
because
state
he
as to
wasn't
who
born in
Rona was.
Italy,
And if they
and
got
all
caught, they'd be
immigrants get
deported.
fingerprinted when they move
So
to
these
the
are
country.
two powerful
I see.
motivators
So that's why
for
they
them
had his
to get rid of
fingerprints on
Rona.
file.
Unfortunately for
The
her,
police, of course,
Mohammed
tried to
and
contact
Tuba
Guede
took
for
the
questioning,
stand
but they
during
could
this
not locate
very
him. It
charged
seemed
trial,
as if he had
saying
fled
that
the town.
yes, the girls
So
had
he
dishonored
has
them, and yes, they
bloody
called them very
fingerprint
bad
and
names
he is
after their
gone.
death.
Okay, doesn't look
but
good for
they
him.
never would
Oh,
have
that is just
killed
the
them.
beginning of it, Meghan.
Mohammed
So
made
they
no
end up
attempt
talking
to
to
hide
his family,
feelings,
his friends,
about the
anyone
girls,
they could,
saying that
and they
God gave
ended up
them what they
having one of
deserved.
his close
Said
friends
this on the
come to
stand
the
in his
police
defense.
station
But
and
he
call him
being
on
part of
Skype,
it.
of
Yes.
course, with the police
Tuba
listening into
maintained
the
that she
whole
would
thing.
never have
Now,
hurt
the
her
full
children. She
transcript is
tried to
pretty
play the
interesting. It
loving
could be
mother
read
role.
online. I just
Both
highlight a few
implied
parts
that
that
it
stood
was
out to
again
me.
a rebellious
So during this
Zainab
call,
who was
Rudy initially
responsible
tells
for
his
the
friends,
deaths in
quote,
this
"You
accident.
know, I knew
So
the
Zainab
girls,
was
I knew
driving,
them both,
and they said
but
it was her
nothing
fault.
more. I've been to
'cause
their
they put
house
her in the
twice.
driver's
I didn't
seat.
do
Correct.
anything.
And what
I had
happened to
nothing
the
to do with
son?
it. I wasn't
Hamed
there
was
that
another
evening.
story,
But
though.
if they
While he
found
didn't
fingerprints, it
testify,
means I
he
must
had
have
already
left them
given some
before.
very
So he
damaging
says, you know, he was
statements,
there
placing
a few
himself
days
at the
before all
scene
this.
of the crime.
However,
but
just
only
a few
him, not
minutes
his
later into the
parents. He
conversation,
stayed
he
loyal to his
admitted to
parents
being at
to the very
Meredith's
end.
flat
That's
that
not
evening,
surprising.
the
No, it
evening
wasn't
of her
surprising.
murder.
His
saying
story was that
that
the girls
he had
took
seen
the
her the
Sentra
night
for a
before when they
joyride.
were all
No
out for
explanation as
Halloween,
to why
and
Rona
the two
would
had
be with
made
them,
plans
really,
to hook up
perhaps
the
for a
next
chaperone.
evening.
But that he
So
had
he
seen
says,
them and
as they
essentially
had
followed
decided,
them
he would go
in
over
what
there. He
turned
goes
out
over
to
there
be
that
a
evening.
chase.
They hook
And
up,
he
but the two did not
accidentally
have
forced
sex
them off the
because
edge
they
by
could
getting
not
too
locate a
close
condom.
to their
But didn't
He
car.
says
call
he
the
went to
police
the
or try to
bathroom,
jump in
and
and
while
help
he
them?
was
Of
in
course
there, he
not.
heard Meredith
Well,
screaming.
you know,
At this
you're
point,
shaking
he
your
ran
head,
out
and
he
this
saw
may
a
not be a
man.
surprise to you,
Now,
but the
listen to
jury
this. He
didn't buy
said
any of
that
their
the
stories.
person wasn't
And all
bigger than
three were
me.
found
I mean,
guilty at
taller.
trial
He
and
wasn't really
received
taller
life
than me. His
sentences.
back was
All right,
turned.
Amy, I don't
I
think
saw
the
Meredith
outcome was a
bleeding
surprise
already.
here,
She had a
but this
slash
brings
in
up
her
a
throat.
topic that we
The
haven't
guy
discussed
took a
before
knife,
on the show.
and I
So
have
let's
wounds on
discuss
my hand because
honor-based
I grabbed
violence.
his hand.
Honor
He
killing
tried to
is
stab
the murder
me,
of a
and
woman
I
by
still have
male
wounds
family
on my
members
hands.
in
They're
response to
healing
the
now,
belief
but I
that the
still
woman
have them.
has
And then he
dishonored in
continues, I
some
tried
way
to
or
help her.
brought
And
shame
if my
to the
prints are in the
family.
house, it's
only
obvious
the killing
because
of a
I
woman. You
touched
can't have an
everything.
honor killing
So,
of a male.
You can have an honor killing of a male, but
very
it's typically
incriminating. And he
women.
also,
It's almost always
the
women.
police are very
Yes.
happy about
There
this
is
part. He
there are
also
ways
told
that
his
males can
friend
bring shame
that
to
he
the
had
family.
fled
I was
to
going to say,
Germany because
if
he was
if
scared.
a male
So now the police
maybe
know
comes
at
out
least
as
what country he is in.
Yes.
homosexual,
Megan, you
or
asked about
It's
his
possible, but
criminal
this is
history
predominantly
before.
gender-based
So I
violence
want to
against
go
women.
back to that for a moment
Yeah.
because there were
The killing
numerous
is the way
media
that the males
reports that
preserve
said
the
that Guede
honor in
had
the
a
eyes of
history
their
of drug
families and their
crimes,
neighbors.
but
So
I
it's
could
really
not
about
find any
public
evidence that he was
perception.
ever convicted of
Women
any
are
such
viewed
offenses.
as property in
However,
most of
1
these
week
cultures
prior
where
to
honor
Meredith's
killings
murder,
prevail,
he was
and women
caught by
are
law
expected
enforcement
to
in
obey their
Milan
brothers,
while
fathers, and
burglarizing a
husbands.
nursery school.
Hands down, no questions.
But
Women
not
who have
only
been
was
raped
he
are
in
also
a
at
nursery
risk,
school
as
when
they
he wasn't
are
supposed
thought
to be
to
there,
have
he was
shamed the
carrying a
families as well.
large
You
knife,
probably know
which
this
he had
already.
stolen from the
Estimates
facility's
are that
own
at least
kitchen.
5,000 women
I
are
wonder if
killed
that's a
per
murder
year
weapon.
in
During
honor
the same
killings.
encounter,
This
he
is
was found in
globally.
possession
just
of a
gonna ask
laptop
that.
and cell
Okay.
phone,
These are,
which
again,
had been
usually
reported
young women
stolen
who
from a
have been
local law
alleged
firm.
to have committed some
Also,
act
they found
of
a woman's gold
sexual
watch,
impropriety,
which
or
had
women
been
who are
reported
perceived as
missing
becoming
during
too
yet another
westernized, and
burglary a few
therefore
days prior.
they are
And most
defying their
importantly, the
cultural
manner in which he
expectations.
entered and
Honor killings are
burglarized
most
those
prevalent in the Middle
establishments
East,
were
and in
similar to the
particular
manner in
Turkey,
which Meredith's
Lebanon,
flat was broken
Jordan,
into.
and South Asia.
So that is breaking
to
breaking a
stand in
second-story
India.
window.
Doesn't
by
mean they don't
throwing a
happen
brick
anywhere
or a
else,
rock through
and
it.
doesn't
Wow,
mean they
very
always happen
smooth.
there.
Even
but
more
that's where
information
they're most
emerged as
prevalent.
police
The
interviewed people
methods for
who
honor
knew
killings
Rudy.
vary,
He had
but they
no
have
legal
included
employment,
burning,
no
stoning,
permanent housing,
beheading,
no
drowning.
familial or
They
other
usually involve
support
some
systems,
form of
and he
torture,
was
to be
described
honest.
as both a
As
drifter
Westerners, I
and
don't
someone
think
who
we
lacked
can
direction in
understand this
life.
type of violence,
An
or we have
acquaintance of
trouble,
Rudy
but
also
it
indicated
is
that he was
cultural,
not
and
very
it is not a part
successful
of
with
our
women,
culture per
and he
se.
greatly desired
But
a
many of these
girlfriend.
countries also, just so you know,
A
have
few
actually
mutual
outlawed
friends
these
also
honor
said he
killings.
was briefly
But
interested
they
in
don't
Amanda
bring
at
down
one
the
point,
full
and some
force
say
of the
he did
law
show
when they
interest in
happen.
Meredith
So
as well.
even
Now,
if the
Rudy was
law
20 years
exists on
old
the
at the
books,
time of
they
Meredith's
still allow
murder,
for the
and
practice.
he originated from
It's still
Ivory Coast,
somewhat
which is a country
culturally
located
permissible.
on
Does
the
that make
south
sense?
coast of West Africa.
Okay, sorry.
So
It's
he came to
illegal,
Italy
but
with
not
his
deviant.
father around the age of 5.
Oh my
And
gosh,
he
that was
became a
brilliant.
naturalized
Thank you.
Italian
No.
citizen.
Deviant
He did have a
behavior is
very
behavior
abusive
that
relationship with
departs
his
from
father,
social
who
norms.
ended up leaving
Not all
his young
deviant
son
behavior
in
is
Perugia
criminal,
to
but
return
not all
to
criminal
Ivory Coast.
behavior is deviant.
Rudy
Like,
did
for
have a
example,
tough start.
when I
He
teach
lived
this
with
in class,
several
I'll say,
foster families until adulthood,
speeding's
and then
illegal,
his most
but
recent
not
foster
as long
family
as you're
had
only going a
apparently
little over the
abandoned
speed
him
limit
in
and not
weeks
putting
prior
anyone in
to
danger.
Meredith's murder.
Speeding is not
So it
something
was
that you
following
would
the
be,
occurrence of the second
informally
abandonment that Rudy
sanctioned for,
began that
right?
spree of
Yeah.
break-ins.
So
I mean,
great example
these
and
are
brilliant
all
point, Amy.
classic
Thank
signs
you.
of like
What can be
escalation
done
in an
here in
offender,
terms
right?
of it still
Absolutely.
being
So besides
culturally
those
permissible?
fingerprints I
It's
mentioned
difficult.
earlier on,
International
DNA from the
laws
crime
could
scene had
enforce
also
harsher
matched
punishments for
Rudy's.
these countries
On November
who aren't
19th, Rudy
enforcing their
Guede was
own laws.
apprehended by
Certainly,
German law
we need a better
enforcement
review
while
of the
riding a
practices
train in
and
which he
more
failed to
research on
purchase
this
a ticket
topic.
for.
Absolutely.
They were kind of eyes out
Ultimately,
for
though,
him,
Amy,
and
it
then
would
he
be
made the
also
mistake
difficult
of
to
getting
try
on
to
this train without
change
paying. They
cultures,
ran his
especially
name,
from
and
the
they found
outside
out that
in. So
Italy
it's a
was
matter of
looking for him.
how do you
So
get?
he was quickly
It's almost like when we
extradited
talk
back
about
to
socialist
Italy.
organization.
When questioned by
Like,
police,
it's not
Rudy
up
claimed to have
to
had a
us to,
consensual sexual relationship
organize
with
certain
Meredith.
areas. It's how do
However,
you
by all
help
accounts,
people
she
to organize
barely knew him.
themselves. So how do you
They
help a
met in
culture
passing
to,
because he was
transform
friends with
some
the
of their
neighbors who lived
norms?
downstairs.
Regardless, in Canada, this is not permissible. It's illegal, and they broke down the force of the law.
Seems really logical.
And obviously,
I
in the
mean,
United
why
States,
do you
we don't
think
permit
he
this
had to
type
say
of
that? They had
violence
a
as well.
consensual
Any
encounter.
idea
Because there was
how
signs of
often it
sexual
occurs,
assault,
even
and I
though
mean,
it's
you had to
not
cover that
permitted?
up. I think it's a
Exactly.
very
And
rare event in the
he
U.S.
knew that
I
his
certainly know of a
DNA and
couple of
fingerprints were
cases,
there.
and we've had listeners
He
write in,
had
but it's
to be
not
able to
it's
explain that
not
because he couldn't lie and
prevalent,
say he
nor is
wasn't
it
there.
common,
Also,
here
the
in United
autopsy
States.
report revealed
Let's
that
talk
she
about
suffered
theory.
forcible
This is the first time we've
intercourse,
covered this
making his
type
story
of
even
case,
less plausible.
and the first
So
time we
other
really
than his
discussed
DNA
honor-based
being
violence
found
on this
inside
show. I
Meredith,
discussed it
it
in my
was also
classes.
sign
But
of not
I'd like
just
to know,
intercourse,
Amy,
it was forcible
what
intercourse.
criminological theory
Now, clearly,
does this tie
Rudy
to
Guede was not in a
explain
good
how this
position.
happened? I know you're going to know it.
Confronted with the
Culture
irrefutable
conflict
DNA
theory?
evidence.
How? Why?
I think
The
it's really
Shafia
important to
subculture
really have our
rejected certain
listeners
cultural
understand just
goals
how
and
much
means
evidence
of our
they have
mainstream
against
culture.
Rudy
So
Guede.
they had their
Overwhelming.
own
Overwhelming. You
values
didn't
and
even hear
norms
all of it yet,
and
and
their
it's
own
already
definitions
overwhelming.
of deviance.
So obviously
That's
we have the
absolutely right.
DNA.
And their
The DNA was
definitions
found
of
inside
deviance
Meredith's
were
body. His
in
handprint
direct
in Meredith's
contradiction
blood.
to
It's in her
conventional
blood. His handprint
definitions of
found on a
normality
pillowcase
and
underneath
deviance.
her body.
Amy said it
His
brilliantly.
DNA,
but yeah,
along
I
with
mean,
Meredith's
that's the best
blood,
way to
was
say it.
found
Their
on Meredith's
subculture
purse.
essentially
His
conflicted
shoe
with
prints soaked in
our
Meredith's
mainstream
blood were
culture,
found both
and they
in the
chose
bedroom and in
adhering
the
to their
hallway
cultural
leading out the
norms
front
as
door.
opposed to
The
society's
DNA,
norms.
remember
So
there
I think
was
that's definitely
fecal matter left in the
cultural theory
toilet?
for
Let
me
me
here
guess.
is the
It
explanation
It
for why
matched
these
his
crimes
DNA.
happened.
And do you remember
We
he
often find that
told
these
the
theories
police that
also
part?
explain
So it's almost like he was
gang-related
setting
crimes.
up the story
where a
with
gang
evidence
requires,
that was
let's
there.
say, illegal
He
activities,
also
right?
had
Your
scars
initiation.
and
I mean, a
scratches
lot of activities
reflecting
are illegal
defensive
in a
wounds
gang, and
on
your
his hands
allegiance or
and
someone's
on his
allegiance to the
chest when
gang
he was
becomes
arrested.
more important
And
than
of
abiding
course, as
by
we
mainstream
mentioned, he
societal
was caught
rules.
fleeing the country
So it's just
days
another
after
example
the
of
murder.
crimes we can
Given the
explain
mountain of
using
evidence
cultural
against
theory.
him,
Well,
Rudy
and
opted
going
for
back,
what
we
is known
covered this
as a
on one of our
fast-track
Patreon
trial.
episodes.
Have
A
you
lot
ever heard
of
of the
these
fast-track
theories
trial
can
in
also
Italy?
help
No.
us understand
Basically, it's
cult
proceedings
involvement.
where the trial
Absolutely.
phase
Good
is
point.
pretty
Yeah.
much absent.
I always
It's
cite
shorter,
when I teach
it's
cultural
simpler.
theory. I always
There's
cite
usually no
Code of the
witnesses
Street by
called,
Elijah
and it's just the
Anderson. You
prosecution
read it,
and the
right?
defense
I read it in
arguing
graduate
about
school.
evidence
Yep.
that's
Okay.
present
That's where
in
I
the
read it.
case
We went to the
file.
same graduate
It's
school. That
almost
makes
like
sense.
similar
It's a
to the idea of
Everyone should
plea
read it.
bargaining.
Everyone should read
in
it.
the
It's a little
sense
old
that,
at this point,
it's
as
not
we
that
are,
he's
but it is
admitting
good.
guilt, but he's
Yeah, it is.
foregoing
They
at the
probably have,
trial.
like, a
He's
newer
making
edition at
things
this point.
easier on
I
the
don't know.
court
I don't
for
actually
what
think the
I
book's been
believe to
updated,
be
but it
a
explains how
lower
certain
sentence.
members of
Yeah,
society
I think
are
that's
so
I think
alienated
it
from
would be
mainstream
maybe not
society.
exactly the same,
By
but
the
I
way,
understand
that's
the
strain
comparison.
theory too.
Now, this was a good
because
move
they're
for
blocked
Guede,
from
obviously, with
opportunities.
all
So they
that
form their
evidence
own
against him.
subculture
And it
where the
also
focus
kept him
becomes about
separated from
respect and
the
violence to
combined
keep that
Knox
respect.
Salcedo trial.
And even though those
because he
crimes are
continued
different
to
than the one we
implicate both of
discussed
them and
today, the
maintain
main
his
point
innocence.
is
So
not. I
those
mean, the
two
main
were
point is
tried
that they use
together.
violence
He
as a
didn't
way
want
to
to be
secure
tried with
honor,
them.
or
He
at
wanted
least
to be kept
what they
separate.
perceived
Guede's
as
trial
honor.
began on
Obviously,
October
we don't
28th,
perceive it to be
2008, and nobody
honorable
really cared. It was
to
not
murder
televised.
your
The
family
media
members
was
and
not
murder.
talking about
Honor
it.
subjective.
His story
That's true.
wasn't the interesting
I wanted to
story,
also point out, this
right?
is just a geek note.
At his
When I
trial,
teach
Guede
cultural
elected
theory, I
not
usually
to give
teach it
evidence
after
in his
learning
own
theory.
defense.
I don't know if
In
you
other
teach it the
words,
same, but
he
we usually
pled
look
what
at
we
learning
call the
theory
fifth.
or
Because
differential
in Italy, just
reinforcement.
like in the
You
U.S.,
learn
defendants
behaviors
have the
from
right to
someone else
remain
or
silent during
you know,
all court
I look
proceedings
at that
if they
as like
choose to
a
do so.
micro
And
level
that's exactly
theory.
what he did
And
because he
he knew. There was just
someone learns on
nothing
an
he said
individual
could have helped
level,
his situation.
and then
So Rudy
cultural
was
theory
charged
is
with
like the
sexual
macro
assault,
level
murder,
theory where
and
culture
theft,
is the
and he was
teacher.
sentenced
It's
to
interesting
30
that you
years.
say that.
You know, I
because
would have liked
in
to
some of these
see
cases
a life
that
sentence,
you
but 30
hear
years
of,
is
it's
it
the
seems
younger
like an appropriate
generation that
sentence,
is
right?
pushing
Okay, yeah.
against
I
these
mean, I'm with you. I would
outdated
have liked life,
definitions
but
or
it's not
values
a
and
totally
norms.
inappropriate
Because
sentence.
you
But
would think with
2
social
years
learning
later,
that
his
they would
sentence was
act the
decreased
way
to
that
just
their parents
16
act,
years.
right?
Yeah, that's what
but
I
that's
remember.
not the
Why,
case.
though?
And
Okay,
this,
so
in this
he
case,
ended
it's
up
certainly not the
appealing
case. It
his
sounds like
case.
all the
Yeah.
children
They didn't
were
reverse the
rebelling.
case,
They were
but during
rebelling,
his
except for the
appeal
eldest.
is
Yeah,
when
but
they
they were
reduced
absolutely
the
rebelling.
sentence.
And
I see.
unfortunately,
Okay.
they paid the
I'm
price
not
for it.
exactly
Okay,
sure why.
we've
but
covered the
it's
theory
very
part. Final
interesting.
conclusions here.
Let's put Rudy
They were
aside now.
caught,
So
all
Rudy
three,
gets,
punished
he gets his
appropriately,
30
but
years.
I'm just
2
gonna
years
say it,
later, he
Amy.
gets 16
This is one
years.
where I
The
would be
prosecution, the
absolutely
media,
comfortable
the
with the
general
death penalty,
public,
even
everyone's
though
just
Canada
forgetting
doesn't do the
about
death
Rudy
penalty
and
anymore.
much less
Amy,
about
what
the
are your
fact
thoughts
that he
on
was
justice being served?
convicted
Life
of
without
committing
parole,
the
you said?
murder
Yeah.
of Meredith.
For me,
It's
that's
like
justice
people
being
just
served.
ignored the fact
I feel
that
bad
this had
for
even
those poor
happened,
children.
and there
There
was
are
barely any
younger
media
children, and
coverage.
now
Like
they're
you would
growing
think
up
there'd be
with no
headlines like
family.
Rudy guilty
So,
of murder of
we
Meredith
forgot that
Kircher.
there
I
are
would've.
additional
Nope, the
victims
headlines
here.
were so
All of
focused
the
on
children
Amanda.
are
They
victimized
continued
here. And
speculating
even though justice was
wildly
served, that
about
doesn't
this
bring these
tabloid
four
created
beautiful women
phenomenon
back.
that was known as
However,
this
telling their
Foxy
story
Nazi. Now, I
keeps
don't
the
even want
memory
to
of them
say Amanda
alive
because
and
it
allows
wasn't
us a
even Amanda.
healthy
It was
outlet
this
to discuss
idea
the
of this
issue of
person
violence
that
against
they
women.
created.
Thank you so
Right.
much.
The
I've been wanting
widespread
to
belief
cover
at
one
this
of these
point was that Amanda
cases.
was
I'm
the
so glad you
ringleader.
did,
She,
because
along with
it's an area
Raffaele
we
and
really
Guede,
haven't
were
yet
involved in a
gone
sex
into.
game gone
Before
wrong.
we
So
head out
remember,
today,
the
let's take a
prosecution
supporter
now had to say,
question.
okay,
Now, this
so
question is
Rudy's
from
found
Emily.
guilty,
And Megan, I
so we
bet I
must
could
bring him
guess
into
what your
this now.
answer
It must
is.
have been
Ready?
Rudy
We'll
alone
see.
with
The question
Amanda and
is,
Raffaele.
The
if you
logic
could
would have thought,
interview
oh, we
any
caught the
female
real
offender,
perpetrator, so
who would
we
it
don't
be,
have to. But
and
now
what would you
I've seen
ask
this
them?
happen before in
Oh,
a couple
Amy, you
cases where
can,
they
but
felt
you
they
also
had to tie them
cannot guess
together.
this one because
They
I
just dig their
probably
heels
have
in
about
deeper
5
instead of
answers
admitting
here.
that perhaps they had gotten
one
it
of
wrong.
yours is
Tunnel
Jodi
vision
Arias,
at its
no?
finest.
Well, always
Yep.
Jodi Arias.
So Rudy's
She
convicted.
would
Let's
be
move
top
on
on
to
the
Amanda and
list, but
Raphael.
also Casey
As you
Anthony,
could
even
imagine,
though
this
she was
whole ordeal
acquitted,
was awful for them.
I
While
believe
in
she is
prison,
guilty, and I have a
Raffaele
lot
suffered
of
extreme
questions. I don't
trauma.
think she
He
would
was placed
answer
in
them.
solitary
The problem
for
is,
about
Amy, that
6
some of these
months.
people wouldn't answer
I
the
think you would
questions, but
agree with
also
me.
on my
It's
list,
likely it was
for
for his
sure,
own
ones
safety,
that we have
given the
covered,
nature of the
Betty
crime. But
Broderick,
I don't really know how the prison
undoubtedly, but
system works in
also I would
Italy.
love
But I would
to
guess that.
interview
Right.
Diane
He
Downs
also
if
had,
possible, and
severe depression,
my list goes
suicidal
on and on.
ideation.
Well, an
Amanda as
important
well had
question
a
is, what
very
would you ask
difficult
them,
time
though?
during
Pick
her
one and tell me what you'd ask
incarceration.
them.
Amy, I'm going to let you
Think
go
of
first
all
on
the
this one and think
deprivations that
about
come
that.
along with
How about you?
incarceration.
You know what, Megan?
On top
I'm
of
gonna
that,
have
being
to
in a
just go
foreign
with
country,
Carla
I could
Homolka
not.
because
That's
she's
what I
been
was
top of
thinking,
mind
being away
lately.
from the family.
And of course, on
Really?
top of that,
Yeah,
being
and I
innocent,
just
right?
want to know.
I mean, she was lucky, as
how
she talks
can
about
you
in her memoir.
victimize your little
Her
sister?
family and
And like
friends
you
rented
said,
a
you were
place
not
nearby,
going
and
to
they
get
took
an
turns
honest
visiting
answer,
her.
but that's
and
what I
she
want
did
to
have
know.
a few
Who would I
people
do?
in the prison who were kind to her.
A tough
Never
question.
once
I'll
did
have
Raffaele
to
or
go back
Amanda
to my
waver.
first
They
episode,
adamantly
Betty
denied
Broderick,
any
one that has
involvement,
always stuck
and of
with me.
course, they pled
For
not
years,
guilty
Betty
to all
Broderick
charges.
has not
Their
really
trial
shown
began on
remorse.
January
She's
16th,
really
2009.
said things like, "I'm
Of course, we're
sorry for
talking
what they
about a
made
different
me
criminal
do."
justice system,
But now we're
Italy
talking
versus
about
the
over
U.S.
30
Similar
years
to us
later.
in Italy,
So
defendants
I would
are
go back and I
innocent
would
until
ask
proven
Betty
guilty.
Broderick at this
But
point
there are
in her
some
life,
really kind
does
of
she
key
feel
differences.
any
The main
remorse
difference that
or
I want to,
responsibility
highlight between
for
the two
what she did,
systems is
for
that in
murdering
Italy,
her
they don't have a jury
children's
trial.
father,
It's not a
for
jury of an
murdering Linda?
individual's
I would
peers.
really like to know
Usually
if there's
during
any
trial,
genuine
there's
feeling
a
of
panel
remorse
of
there.
judges.
Excellent.
Usually
That's an
there'll
awesome
be
question.
one
Thank
senior
you to
judge
Emily
and two
for asking
junior
that.
judges.
Thank you,
Sometimes
Amy.
panels
Thank
go
you,
up to
everyone,
6
and
judges,
we'll
but
catch you
typically
next
a
time
panel
on
of
Women in
3
Crime.
judges.
Women
Now,
in
for
Crime
serious
is written and
offenses, a
hosted
defendant
by
does
Meghan
have the
Sachs
right
and Amy
to
Shlosberg.
have
Our
a
producer
panel that
and
also
editor is
includes
James
citizens.
Varga.
But
Music
it's not a
composition
jury of
is by
one's
Desert
peers,
Media.
and it's also
If you
not
enjoy the
unanimous.
show,
It's
please remember
majority,
to subscribe
which is,
and leave a
quite
review.
different from
You can
a
also support the show while
Very
gaining
different.
access to
we
ad-free
can
episodes,
teach a
exclusive
whole
AMAs,
semester
and other
course
bonus
about the
content
differences
for a
between
small
these two
monthly
systems.
contribution
We don't
to
have time
Patreon.
for that
For more
here,
information,
but it is
visit
important to note that that plays a big role in
patreon.com/womenincrime.
what's going on here. Now, the prosecution during trial contended that Amanda was the one who attacked Meredith in her bedroom, and she tried to strangle Meredith, hypothesizing that all 3, Guede, Knox, and Solicito, held her down while Guede sexually abused her. Because
Sources
again,
for
they had to
today's
explain
episode
how
include
Rudy
an
Guede's
article
DNA
in
was inside her,
Maclean's,
but no one
an
else's.
episode of
And they said that
Forbidden,
Amanda
Dying
had
for
cut
Love,
Meredith with a
articles
knife
from the
before
Toronto
inflicting the fatal
Star,
stab
and
wound,
Stacy
and that
Mallicoat's
she
book,
had
Women in
stolen the
Crime.
phones
Book
and money
Women in
to
Crime.
fake a
Book
burglary.
Women in Crime.
This was absurd,
Book
and
Women